Hello, hello. We are
Hi,
live.
everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Roy from Teachable. Today, we have an incredible workshop I am very excited for in just a few moments. In the next, 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to get started. Today, we have Angela Fehr. I have had the pleasure of hosting her workshops before. Honestly, it's mesmerizing. So this is just a really fun thing to be a part of. For folks who are joining us, these first 2-3 minutes, we want to let folks show up, but B, let us know you could hear us. I'm going to keep talking to make sure that people can hear and the audio is working correctly. Angela, can you say a few things just to say hi?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Say hi and tell us where you're from. And if you're an existing student of mine, I'd love to know that too. You can pop that up in the chat and say hi. I know some of you know each other because we've painted together before. I'm happy to be here. It's so much fun for me to teach watercolor because secretly I believe everyone should be a watercolor addict, although I haven't converted my husband yet. He builds cars instead, but we all should have a creative outlet, and watercolor is so beautiful. So I love to share that passion of mine and maybe share a little bit of that beauty with you today.
Awesome. That's incredible. And I actually, Angela, I didn't tell you in the prior when we were waiting, I bought a paint by numbers kit, or that's one of the things I was trying to get. And, the whole watercolor piece, using it for like the therapeutic side, I know today that's one of the things you're going to be covering. That's just an incredible outlet. So it's even therapeutic to watch, let alone learn how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. So often people will tell me that they watch, even though they don't paint, they watch just because it kind of brings them a little bit of that inner calm. And it's something I actually am very intentional about when I'm painting, to be in that mindset of there's no such thing as time anymore. We're just here to watch the paint and be in that moment. And so you might have a hard time keeping me on schedule, Aaron.
We'll get through it. Well, so folks, we're going to get started in just a second. A few housekeeping things. Anyone who joins us late, don't feel bad. There will be a replay available. You could also start from the beginning. This is a YouTube link. Feel free to start from the beginning. If you join 10 minutes in and you're worried you missed some of the early parts, there will be a replay. We will send it out later. Have no fear. I know some folks have a habit or can't join right on time, so no problems at all. Also, for anyone who has questions for Angela, has questions throughout her painting session today, I do want to give Angela the chance to really focus on the painting because she's going to be painting on air today. So we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions, feel free you could pop them in the chat, but I would recommend kind of holding those for the last 15 minutes, just because I know we have a lot of folks with us today. And I promise we will make some time to go through, some of the questions that you have as best as we could. Angela, also at the end of today, we'll talk through her class. So for anyone who's new to meeting Angela today, you can learn a bit more about how you can continue to learn from some of the incredible things she does. So without further ado, Angela, your workshop today is learning watercolor through play. I think all the folks who are here, what they should expect to learn is some of the most important supplies for watercolor painting, how to choose their brushes, paper, and colors, and just really an action plan for growing skills through play. With that, I kick it to you and love to hear a bit about your background and what folks can expect to see today.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, that if I had been teaching this class about 20 plus years ago when I first started painting, it might have been learn watercolor through guilt, because when I first started painting, it was my focus was very much on making a perfect painting and feeling bad about all the stuff I didn't know how to do yet, the disciplines that I wasn't doing because I was too busy just wanting to dive right in and play instead of doing a lot of prep work. And so it was so encouraging to me and exciting to realize that my learning style is playful. It allows me to get a little weird and a little obsessed with where I'm at, and recognizing that I still grow even when I'm not maybe academic or disciplined about my learning. And that really freed me up to enjoy what I was doing and trust that I would keep getting better. If you are painting along with me today, I want to just encourage you to not feel like you need to keep up with me and not feel like you need to match me stroke for stroke. In fact, my first instructions to you would probably be just watch. Give yourself this gift of just the time of watching and thinking about what you see and how you can apply it to your own painting practice. Like Erin said, the video is going to be available for you to watch again. And so, you don't have to feel an urgency about this process. We're going to switch the camera over, and that's just going to take me a second here. And we're going to take a look at the supplies. Again, this is a guilt-free approach, so you don't need to feel bad if you don't have everything that I'm going to show you here. And you don't need to feel, I'm just going to turn my mic, it might be noisy. You don't need to feel like you need to go out and spend a lot of money either. I want to really simplify this, and I'm going to go over it very quickly. So if you feel like you need stuff written down, a lot of these resources are available on my website. And they're also available within the course that we're going to talk about at the end of the broadcast. So let's just quickly look. I know you're assuming if you're going to start painting, you're going to need paint, you're going to need brushes, and certainly we have those here. First of all, I'm going to just show you the difference between some of these products. This little watercolor kit has the paint already in the pans, and those little squares are called pans. And these, all three of these actually are pan kits. This one comes empty and you can fill it up. And it's actually this little nifty gadget. Everything slots together and you have everything you need for doing just a tiny little mini painting. All of these are quite small. Anytime you're painting with a pan this size, you're probably going to be painting a smaller painting. And so for me, I like a lot of paint. I like to paint a little bit bigger. And so I like to buy my paint by the tube. Gram for gram, it's actually cheaper to buy tubes of fluid paint, or what's not really fluid, but tubes of, moist paint, I guess would be the word, and fill your own pans. There are some artists who will always squeeze out a little bit of fresh paint onto their palette. I'm not one of those. I feel like there are pros and cons between the two. If you're squeezing out your paint fresh every time, it's really easy to pick up more paint than you need and end up having it washed away in your water container when you clean your brush. However, if you're squeezing your paint to dry in your palette, sometimes the challenge can be getting enough pigment on your brush after it's dried and hardened a little bit. So there's, you kind of have to decide what pros and cons you want to go with there. And we might do a little bit of both today. I wanted to show you as well. So that's the paint. Really, I would encourage most people to start with a small range of colors. In fact, this is a really good example of the basics that you might need to start painting. A yellow, a blue, kind of a middle of the road blue, and a reddish pink. And if you're choosing colors, think about your printer. Think about the colors that come in a printer cartridge. They are the most versatile colors for mixing. And so those are good colors to choose for painting as well. And in this little palette, I've added a green, I've added a violet, and I've added an orange just to have those on hand so I don't have to always mix those secondary colors. So, and I have them here as well. Again, my yellow, my blue, and my magenta or reddish pink. And I also have an indigo here, a really dark navy blue. And that's a lot of fun to have on hand because I can use it as a dark. And so those are the colors I'm going to work with as my base colors today. But because I like to learn watercolor through play, I'm probably going to incorporate a few other colors so you can see how pretty this beautiful medium is. In fact, let's just peek at my palette over here. You can see that I have a real love for color. And this palette holds 64 different colors. Most of the time I'm going to be choosing maybe a half a dozen to work with on one painting. I wouldn't dive into 64 colors for a single painting. That's just a little bit much. When I'm painting, 90% of the time I'm grabbing a round brush. That's these two right here, are really good examples of a nice synthetic round brush that you might find at an art supply store. This one's a number 10, that's the size. Actually, this one's a 10 as well. They're slightly different because they're made by different brands. I like a round brush because they make a nice thin line, but you can also, use some pressure, press it down, and get a wider stroke as well. So they're a very versatile size and shape. So those are what you might look for a brush when you're first getting started. The other thing I wanted to show you was just this little palette underneath here, because this is the palette I started painting with. And this just goes to show you how an early investment in watercolor stays with you. I have refilled this palette so many times over the last 2 decades. Eventually, I did upgrade to this larger one, but this one I still pull out from time to time. The pigment's hardened, but I just need to moisten it a little bit, and they're ready to paint with again. And I have a lot of nostalgia for this old palette. It's not showing any sign of wearing out anytime soon. The last thing you're going to be looking for at an art supply store is probably the hardest thing to buy, and the thing I stress the most in my teaching, because I want your painting process to be fun and enjoyable. I want it to be easy for you to learn how to work with watercolor. And it's really hard to learn watercolor if you're choosing the wrong paper. And we tend to gravitate, as a new painter, you're probably going to feel like you need to buy a student grade watercolor paper. And this is where you're making a mistake, because the artist quality paper, the 100% pure cotton paper, most student grades are a blend of cellulose and cotton. The 100% cotton paper just plays with watercolor so much more beautifully. The water dries more evenly. It just seems like it makes watercolor come alive. So Arches has been around for over 500 years. They're still making paper, and it's very consistent in quality. This is just a pad of watercolor paper, and I'll show you how I work with a pad of paper. And then this brand, Hanamula, is also 100% cotton. And if I don't know a brand when I go to an art supply store, I spend a little bit of time, if I can, feeling the paper. And you can ask at the store for a sample to try. But if it has kind of a peach fuzz texture, if it's a little bit rough, not shiny, then I know that that 100% cotton paper is probably a quality that I'm going to enjoy working with. Now, this particular pad of paper is actually a block. It has the adhesive at the top, but also on the other 2 sides. And so what it feels like I have is, yeah, a block of paper. And the nice thing about that is this is ready to paint on. I can get this paper wet, and because it's adhered on all 4 sides, it's not going to curl or ripple or buckle, at least not very much. For the pad of paper, where it's just adhered at the top, I'm going to want to stabilize this somehow so that I can paint on it without it curling and rippling. And usually what I do is I take just a painting support. This is a painting board. This particular one is made of corrugated plastic, same kind of thing as you would see in a realty or an election sign. And I do actually buy them at my local sign shop. And it's nice and light, it's waterproof, and I can tape my paper down. And by taping it on all 4 sides, I have a nice, similar to a block, a nice smooth surface to paint on. And this one I've divided in half. I want to do 2 paintings today, and we're going to start that right away. I do go in more depth over supplies and recommended brands and so forth in my courses, and there's a resource link on my website as well. It can be really confusing to walk into the art supply store and see the amount of choice there. And really, if I wasn't sure what to do, I would ask not just the art supply store owner, but I would ask who does watercolor and works here, and ask someone who's actually using watercolor so that they steer you toward good products. We're going to do some painting. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the beauty of watercolor. One thing that makes watercolor different from other types of paint is that it's very transparent. And that gives us the ability to layer and mix. And we use water to help the paint move. And you can see I've got a few samples here of different little playful things I've done in my painting warm-ups. Every time I come to paint, I take the time, this one I did last night actually, it feels like an ocean wave. Every time I come to paint, I take the time to play because it helps me feel free to do whatever I want. When you make art, you do get to do whatever you want, and it should be coming out of your head and out of your heart onto the paper. But sometimes, we come in, we bring the stresses of the day, we bring maybe our to-do list, we bring a consciousness of time. Watercolor can be so beautiful. Just 2 colors can make your painting come alive. And but to get into that place, that free place of doing whatever I want, painting something simple and calling it done, putting a signature on it, that can be hard to get into that mindset. And that's why play, even 25 years into my journey, is the most important part of my painting practice. This is what kind of flips the switch, switches the flip over so that I can recognize the beauty in what I'm doing. I can see kind of my artistic genius come out. I can feel excited about my work. It's very easy to, early on, I wanted to make a perfect painting. It was very easy to feel judged by my paintings when they didn't turn out. It was easy to feel embarrassed if I came up with a muddy mess. I'm not even sure where the up and down is on this painting. And so when I gave myself permission just to come to paint because it was beautiful, so that I could make something really pretty and really simple sometimes and feel that freedom, there was something that happened to me. I started to love my paintings, and it actually helped me to learn to love myself a little bit. And it's been a very important part of my self-care, especially over the last year, when I've had a lot of people depending on me and wanted to kind of share some of the peace and joy that I've found through watercolor. So I'm going to share that with you today. And the amazing thing about this is when we come to play and when we let the watercolor kind of lose control on our paper, we actually learn a lot about this beautiful medium, and rather than when we're trying to control it. So just to get started, I've tilted my board. I don't know if you noticed that. I put a little block here so that my painting board is just at a bit of an angle. And that's going to help gravity. If I use too much water, that water is going to flow down to the bottom of the page. And I'm going to get my pigment ready just by moistening the top of it as well. Because I work with paint that's squeezed into my palette and allowed to dry, this just releases that surface pigment and makes it really easy for me to get a juicy amount of color. And I'm going to grab a biggish brush. I'm going to show you this amazing brush. This one probably would feel too out of control for a beginning painter, but for me, I love the big stroke that it makes. We're going to do a little bit of wet and wet painting first. And I'm actually going to wet my paper as well as my paint. And water for me in watercolor equals movement. There we go. I don't know if you could hear me because spray bottles, but water equals movement. So the more water I have, the more my paint is going to move. And that can be really exciting, but also really out of control. Let's work with the yellow because I know it's a color that wants to move as well. So we can really see how this works. So I'm just going to put a nice stripe of yellow right at the top of the page. And this is where I want to lose track of time and just start to watch the paint a little bit. The first thing this tells me is that I have more moisture on the sides than I do in the middle. Right away, you can see the yellow running down the edge of the paper. So this is telling me something about the nature of watercolor. And those are important things to observe. As we internalize those, and we can do that through play, it makes it really easier to anticipate what's going to happen next. And what's going to happen next right now is we're going to throw another color in. And I'm dripping because I'm kind of a messy painter. And I'm going to work with a really light touch. Let's just touch in some of this magenta. And the yellow I chose there early on, I know there's always someone who asks, is called Nicolazo yellow. Again, choose a yellow that feels like a kind of a true yellow for your beginner yellow to mix. And try to choose one that's rated as transparent. And that's usually written on the tube of paint. I'm going to add a little bit of water. We're going to encourage even more movement. Movement teaches me what watercolor wants to do. And so adding that moisture and letting it move, watching it as it moves, these are important tools for my development as an artist. And now you can see I've got the most moisture in the middle. Everything's running down the middle. Water will always take the path of least resistance. It's going to take the paint with it. And so we see all of that movement happening down the middle of the page. And it's really pretty. And this is an exercise because I've slowed myself down and I'm paying attention, I'm watching. I'm inviting the painting to speak to me a little bit. When I first started painting, let's use a big dark color. When I first started painting, I thought I was the boss. I thought I got to call all the shots, and then I would get frustrated when what I wanted to happen wasn't happening. This is the indigo. And by letting watercolor kind of do what it wants to do, I'm actually inviting a partner into my painting process, and I'm kind of showing up to engage with it. And I like to think about watercolor and I being in a relationship because we're learning to trust each other because I can't make it do what it doesn't want to do. And there are times when I've tried. And so I come and I watch and I trust it to be beautiful. And I trust myself to learn what to do. I'm just blotting excess moisture from the bottom and just watch and engage and try things and experiment. It's interesting when I sprayed that just now, it pushed some of that indigo, look at that, in spatter across the page. So suddenly I kind of have this messy splatter of indigo that made my yellow kind of dirty. I'm not sure if I like that. So I'm going to use my spray bottle and just spray along the top and encourage more movement again. And there are times when it feels like I'm removing more paint than I'm putting on. Because I'm doing so much painting with my water bottle. But look at it go. Oh, so pretty. We're going to catch that puddle there as it floats down. I like to paint on this black absorbent pad because I use so much water. And have you noticed that the magentas pretty much disappeared? We covered it up with the indigo a bit. So let's bring it back. We'll I dripped a little. So that's inviting accident into my painting. And I kind of like that. So let's invite some more accident into the painting. To me, this feels like it's good for my mental health because by inviting some things that I can't control into my painting, I'm kind of acknowledging the things I can't control in my life and that I do have to kind of let go of control in some areas and trust that good things are still going to happen. And when I do that in my painting, I don't know, it kind of brings me hope for the future too. Okay, that's really pretty. I still have a blue that I could add, but I really like this shape. So we're gonna leave this alone. This technique is called wet and wet. And it's, as you can see, one where we don't control very much about the process. Everything's very soft. There's a lot of movement. Colors flow together. It's actually a beautiful beginning if you're painting a landscape or a floral or anything really. It's a beautiful beginning for establishing major shapes without a lot of detail. And so what I learn here in this loose wet and wet style of painting does help me in planning my representational paintings as well. Let's do one more thing because we can. I have a little container of salt here. And I'm just going to sprinkle a few grains into my hand, and we're going to dot them onto the paper in this lower corner. Maybe a couple up here as well. And the salt creates a chemical reaction. It wants to push at the water and the paint. And so it creates opportunities for texture in my painting. So we've got about 20 grains of salt there in that corner. We'll look at that as it dries and see if it does something pretty. If I put it on when the paper's too wet, the salt will just dissolve and we won't see the effect. And if it's too dry, then the paint won't react the way I want it to. So it's a little bit unpredictable, like most of the process so far. For the second side of my paper, and I'm really hoping we'll have time to do four playful exercises that you can apply to your own learning to paint process. For this one, I think we're going to choose the indigo to start with, and we're going to work on dry paper. And I like to use a big brush with long bristles for this because it gives me the chance to make a shape that I can't control very well. But actually another tool that I sometimes use for this little exercise is a really cheap and junky brush. This one I got at the hardware store. It was on the clearance rack, and I think it was less than $1. So let's use this one just for fun. And we're just going to create a big shape. And I'm actually not loving that super much, but we'll just keep adding to it until I get something I like and feel excited by. Okay, I kind of like that. And I like a shape that's wider at the top and gets narrower. That's kind of something I'll do in a lot of these playful exercises. I don't know what it is. It could be, I don't know. It's just a random shape. We're painting abstract. And I like experimenting.
Angela, just for 1 second, for whatever reason, it just froze on my side. I just want to make sure folks can see on their side as well. Yep. Can you, if possible, you might have to just flip-flop the cameras for a second.
Why don't we do that just to make sure it's working?
Yeah, it froze 10 seconds ago.
It looks like it.
And I see you waving. You're perfect. Exactly.
Okay, my hand has disappeared, so, and there we go. Okay.
We are in business. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for letting me know. Let's
keep
going. And okay, so Aaron interrupted me, and we'll all blame him if this doesn't turn out. But
I'll take it.
no, what actually that's done is it's given us just a second to let the paint sit. And as the paint sits, it starts to absorb into the paper. And I'm going to use my spray bottle again and encourage a little bit of movement of paint. We're going to get a few edges where the paint has started to dry in the corners, but we're also going to get some movement. And again, this is inviting that out of control. I'm actually choosing to have no control over my painting. And we like control. We're human beings. But I like to allow my painting to tell me what it wants. So there's this beautiful flow of just a drip coming down here. And I can see my salts doing a little bit of something over here. I'm kind of distracted by it. But I'm going to add a few more grains just because I feel like maybe I did put it on too early. Okay, and then we're going to switch back again. I'm going to be easily distracted. But if you're distracted by one painting while you're doing another, I don't think that's a bad thing. Okay, I'm going to bring in one of my favorite colors. This is called Cobalt Teal Blue. And it's one of my favorites because I really enjoy working with it. And what I've done is I've given myself permission to get obsessed with certain colors and to use them repetitively. The better I know a color, the better I'm able to understand what it's going to do in my painting. And right now I'm just touching that cobalt teal blue into some wet areas of the painting. I spattered it a little bit over here as well. It's really pretty. Let's try to zoom in a tiny bit. So it's doing some beautiful things. Let's keep spattering. This brush has such long bristles that it really sprays. And my computer and my microphone and, well, just everything is covered in cobalt teal splatters. And probably it might get over here as well. And one thing about loose painting is it does allow you to be a bit messy, a bit of a slob. So I'm watching again, paying attention to the colors and watching them flow. And I'm thinking about what the third color I'd like to add is. And sometimes I'll go with something completely different, like an orange. Other times, maybe I'll stay in this kind of range of blues. I feel like maybe a yellow-green would be a nice option. So we'll use this green gold. And let's do something really brave with it. And create a big mark here. And a big mark here. And let it mix. Now what's happened is we started with dry paper. And so we have areas where things are very crisp. As I said earlier, water equals movement. And that means when we have dry paper, we have a lack of water. The paint and the water are going to stop unless we're really using a lot of water and gravity takes over. we won't see paint wanting to move into the dry places of the painting. And so we can have some interesting shapes happening here that we couldn't have as much here. Beautiful crisp shapes that we can explore. And this is really pretty. One thing I've given myself permission to do over the years is to recognize that sometimes our genius, our beautiful masterpieces show up in 10 minutes or less. Sometimes they show up in one brush stroke. I think I showed you, I don't know what I just dropped in the corner, but we'll just ignore it. I showed you this painting. This was the work of, mere minutes. That is the fewest number of brush strokes, I think, that I could do. And the beautiful subtlety. I've never been able to sell this painting because when I photograph it for Instagram, it just doesn't show the beautiful subtleties of color. And I know you're probably not seeing them here either. It's so pretty. And, but it was the work of just minutes. And so I've allowed myself to recognize that sometimes those little playful moments, that's all it takes is just a few minutes. And then I get to grab a new piece of paper. My goal for playful painting, and this is where we'll use one of those blocks that I was showing you earlier. My goal for playful painting is I want to paint, I want to come and warm up. I want to paint for as long as it takes before I lose track of time and I start really getting excited about what I'm making. This is just standard masking tape, hardware store variety. It's nothing fancy. And, but I've noticed that my best paintings happen when I'm willing to take some risks, when I'm not worried about failure, and when I'm willing to ask myself, what if? What if I added that big, exciting brush stroke? What if I did something that maybe I wasn't planning to do? And I think there's a life lesson there because sorry, I'm just trying to find a safe place to put my painting. When we plan something, I think sometimes the planning is the most exciting. We're looking for, let's mix some color today. We're looking for something new to happen. But most of the time, our best moments happen in the unexpected. When we're surprised, when something happens that we didn't plan, when the punchline to the joke is something we didn't expect, the joke is going to be funnier. So we have to recognize and invite surprise into our paintings. I'm going to mix some color right now. I'm working with these three, the blue, the cyan, the yellow, and the magenta. This blue has a difficult name. It's Cinereus blue, and it's made by a company called Sennelier. And it's really pretty. And we're going to add a little bit of our Nicolazo yellow to it, create ourselves a green. And I'm not even sure what I'm doing for this warm-up. Let's just do a nice big long line here and let it tell us what it wants. I love using a light touch, and I like that shape. Let's make a Y shape over here, and let's let some color flow inside of that moist shape. So I'm going to touch in my yellow, and we're going to let the yellow actually flow down into that wet mark that we placed with the green. This can create some really beautiful effects. The wet paint is a channel now for the new colors that I'm adding. So whatever I grab, when it touches, I can create this blue line, but when it touches the line I made earlier, we start to see some organic color mixing happen. And we let it do its thing. And that can be really beautiful. I can mix the color here, and I was using the same colors that I touched in, but they're just more interesting and beautiful often when we allow them to mix on the page. Let's do some more of that yellow. It just has so much movement to it. Look at that go. This is where painting becomes a meditation. Creating shapes and allowing enough moisture for there to be good movement. Depending on your climate, this is one thing that takes a little bit of time, is being able to judge how much water to use. Recognizing that you're going to get more movement with more fluidity. And in a drier climate, that might mean you have to work with a little bit of a wetter brush, a little less control to create that flow. I like to also, I used to tell students that you have to paint fast because watercolor dries quickly. And it does dry quickly, especially if we're comparing to oil paint that could take months. And but we don't want to feel rushed. So I like to think about what I'm going to do before I do it. And I think slow, and then I can create those quick, juicy marks. And I'm liking using my point of my brush to create these tiny lines, and then using the side of my brush to create those bigger marks. And just looking to see where it ends up. It feels like tropical blooms. I'm not on a tropical vacation right now, so I'm going to have to get my tropic fixed in my paintings. And I find that actually in the winter, I live in northern British Columbia, so in the winter when things are a little bit dark and bleak, I tend to paint with a lot of color. It's just a really good way of getting some sunshine in my life. And yeah, it's fun. Let's work with a tiny bit more yellow. And then I think we should have time for one more little mini exploration. And actually for that one, I had a bit of an idea. Let's see if we can do it. Okay, we're moving over to this side. We're gonna let that be. I'm really tempted to spray it with my spray bottle right now, but we're not. We're gonna let this one be a mark making exercise. Learning how to use my brush means logging lots of brush miles, choosing to spend time moving my brush to create interesting shapes that I can then plan to use in future paintings. I have this little plastic lid, and I'm going to use this for my next painting, my next playful exploration. Just cleaning it because it had paint on it. And we're going to set that on my paper here, maybe right there. I never end a painting session without getting covered in paint. And I'm thinking for this, let's work with a diluted amount of the indigo. With watercolor, we don't use white paint. You may have noticed I haven't pulled any white out through this whole process. Water dilutes the paint and gives us the ability, there we go, gives us the ability to make a lighter color. And then the white of our paper is actually our white. So if I want white in my painting, I have to leave space for that by not painting in those areas. And that's an element of planning that can be very, very difficult. Takes a little bit of thinking. For me, often when I'm painting a representational subject, a landscape or a floral, or, well, those are mainly what I do, then I generally will paint that multiple times before all my planning comes together and the painting works out. So this is going to be a night scene. That's going to be a moon for us. And I'm going to add a little water. You can see that because my paper was dry, my lid served as a mask. It kept the color from creeping into that area. It gave me a beautiful, nice circle. Let's use the cobalt teal blue. I just feel like that's the color I want to add in here. And we're going to catch that glow of light from the moon. It's got a nice cool feeling. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of white speckly bits that maybe could represent stars. And then I'm going to add some darkest darks with my indigo. We also tend to not use black very often in watercolor. And black paint, when I've used it in a painting, often it feels like it has a dead look. It demands a lot of attention, but it also looks very flat. And so if I want a beautiful, rich, dark or a black, I'll take my indigo and maybe I'll add a bit of red and green to it. I might, or red and yellow sometimes, or I might take some of my darker colors and mix them together to make my own black. Red and green make a really nice near black. That's one way to make a really beautiful, rich dark. I'm liking the little speckles of white that are appearing here. This would be another place where we could use salt to kind of create that starry feel. But I think I'm gonna try something else instead. Often, the funniest thing that I think is kind of human nature for artists, at least in watercolor, is that often in watercolor we'll be in quite a hurry, rather than waiting for these different stages of the paper drying, because when the paper is closer to dry, there's things I can do. I can create blooms by adding a little bit of spatter. You can see there's some little sparkly shapes that just appeared there. Just by spattering a little bit of water from my brush. If I do it too soon, though, they're just going to dilute and flow away. But sometimes we just get in a hurry. We want to see how the painting's going to turn out, and we rush to the end. But watercolor is very much about timing, and I'm learning to trust that by spending this time in play and watching the paint. All of these little demonstrations, working with brush marks here and creating beautiful shapes, and working with wet and wet paint, learning to leave my whites or leave some areas dry. These are all things that make my representational paintings stronger, the paintings that I do of landscapes and so forth. And but the techniques and the skills that I need can often be found in these little experiments that I do in my own time. I'm wondering about adding some of that cobalt teal spatter that was so much fun from before. Let's see if we can't do that. And we're getting to the point, I think, where we can take some questions. I'm feeling like I'm going to wrap this up, and I should probably be covering my moon so I don't spatter it here as I spatter. There we go.
So Angela, I was going to say, to repeat that, because folks are usually about 20 seconds behind us. If there's any questions for what Angela's covered so far, any questions just about the beauty we've watched over these past 40 minutes, please put them in the chat. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. And Pam, I would say, if you don't mind, while we wait for the questions to come in, do tell a bit about your course and, beyond the learning play, just what can folks come to expect kind of in your curriculum?
Well, what has been important to me, and this is something that actually makes my courses often stand out from other online classes in painting, is that it's very important to me that my students know that the artist that they're meant to be doesn't come from them learning to copy what I'm doing. It's very important to me to teach techniques that they can use, but also to learn how to listen to that inner artist and make art that makes you deeply satisfied. I wasted so many years thinking I needed to make art for other people to like, for other people to tell me was good, for someone else to give me permission to make the art I dreamed of making. When all of that was actually found within me and learning to trust myself. And so it's actually very, very challenging to teach a course where, the most important work has to be done by the student. It's, you have to be the one to be willing to ask yourself or take those risks and ask yourself those questions. What kind of art am I meant to make? I'm just switching the camera over here, and we can go back to the work surface if a question warrants it. There we go.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, Angela, a question I had, I've had a chance to watch you a few times, but I still, when you choose, can you, share a bit, just for anyone who joined late, share a bit about the brushes you used today. And then I would love to know more about how you choose those brushes. How do you choose the materials you use to then go and create this play and this art?
What I initially started using when I started painting was what was told to me to buy. And I think we kind of all have to start in that place. The colors I chose, the brushes that I chose were based on what was available in my small town, and also what my instructor gave as a list. And it was interesting because I needed a small range of supplies so that I could grow confident and adept in using that small range. But then over time, I started to look for things that were different. And that invited that playful excitement into my process, that attitude of experimentation. And so over the years, what I use has changed. And I remember being shocked by a fellow watercolor painter who said she owned 300 paintbrushes. And I just couldn't imagine. I had like 3. And so it's funny now because I do have quite a wide range and I bring them in when I need a change. So for me, I really chose not a very imaginative beginning, perhaps, those basic a round brush in a kind of a medium size. Depending on the size you're going to be painting, you're going to want to choose a brush to kind of be in proportion. I like it like a number 8 or a number 10 round brush. And then for colors, again, you want to kind of stick with those primary colors, same as your printer ink, that magenta, cyan, and yellow. And then it's nice to have a darkest dark because when you first start painting, you're not going to be confident in color mixing. So it is nice to have some of those other colors to kind of lean on until you get to know your colors and how they play together. Letting color run on the paper is a really good way of seeing what's possible as colors mix with each other. And it helps me be intentional about what colors I mix together when I'm painting.
It's also incredibly relaxing to watch as a viewer. Watch it. Just that. I know at one point towards the end, you were like, should I bust out the spray bottle again? I was cheering from the side. I was like, yes, It's going to happen.
Yeah. It's funny because when you put that spray bottle on the paper, you're taking something away. You're taking away all the decisions that you've made up until that point. You're erasing them. And so, but you have to subtract in order to gain. And I heard a phrase the other day, addition by subtraction, and there is an element of that that I'm seeing in my art.
Incredible. Well, questions are starting to come in. Before we hop into those in earnest, I would love if you could just, share, like in regards to your course, can you just share a bit about, what could someone expect who's taking that course, like beyond building upon kind of today's workshop, which obviously is a free workshop, just, what are the highlights of your course? What, for someone who watched today was like, wow, I want to continue this journey. Why Heart Colored the Heart-Led Way?
I used to teach, most of the classes I used to teach, especially locally, were all geared toward beginners. And it often seemed to me that all watercolor artists teach beginner courses the same way. Here are the basic techniques. Here is how we use them. Here is when we use them. And it's very academic or just very, boring. It's just showing techniques and telling people how to use them. And I started to ask myself, is there a way, because my emphasis in my advanced art practice is to allow my instincts to guide and my just to be open to possibility and invite curiosity and experimentation into my process. I started asking myself, is there a way to do this as a beginning painter? And I'm sharing my studio with my husband. He's in the garage. He's opening the garage door right now. So my priority was, so I started thinking about that. What would it look like to be a heart-led beginning artist and to learn basic techniques through a much more open-ended and intuitive approach? And so that's what these warm-ups are that we've done today. And that's the goal of the course, is not to turn off your inner artist because you're learning technique, but to somehow find a balance between those two so that you can start out trusting your instincts, knowing you have a good eye that you want to get out on the paper, but also knowing that you have skills to build. And I felt like for me, when I was learning how to paint, I almost had to turn off my creative side so I could master these skills. And I don't think that's necessary. So my focus in this course has been trying to figure out a way to allow your inner artist, to let that voice speak, your taste actually to come out on your paintings, even when you're just learning in that rawest beginner stage. And it's been so exciting to see students embrace the course and learn to paint in that way. And hopefully then we don't have those bad habits of thinking our painting has to be perfect to be beautiful, but rather we get to just share who we are, what we find beautiful and interesting in our paintings.
Absolutely incredible, Angela. And for folks who are watching live and for folks who registered and perhaps watching the replay, the link to Angela's course, it's actually in the YouTube description, and we will send that out later, just in case you're curious what the course she's referencing and if you wanted to check it out later. With that, Angela, are you ready for some questions?
Yes. Oh, I wanted to add as well, I have a really exciting bonus to mention, and that is in beginning of March, I think, in February, March, we actually take this Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way course, and we do it as a group, as an interactive course. So anyone who's purchasing the course now, you get the benefit of kind of going through the content in your own time and then going through it in a classroom setting. We offer the opportunity to join the class as we do add-on live sessions and so forth to go along with the course. And we'll be doing that very soon, in about a month and a half.
Oh, very cool. And today, even in the chat, I mean, I've seen many folks here who are part of the community of Angela's courses. And it seems like you have a very collaborative, helpful community of other artists as well.
Oh, it's amazing. Yes.
Very, very cool. So let's get to some of these questions. We'll get to as many as we could. Let me bring one on the screen here. Is just regarding paint on brush, some residual colors anticipated, but this person has trouble moving between colors without serious color contamination. Any thoughts, any suggestions, Angela?
Yeah, I don't, most of the time I don't worry too much about cross-contamination, because when you're using your paint, I'll just grab one here. When it's dried in the pan like this, any contamination that happens on the surface. Everything underneath is still clean and kind of protected because it's hardened a bit. I would have much more of a struggle with contamination if I was working with that fresh, moist pigment and moving back and forth between colors. But this way I can actually use a clean brush to kind of wipe the surface when it starts feeling like it's contaminated. And I think too, I also am pretty intentional about when I'm picking up multiple colors on my brush. I think my instinct is to choose the lightest color first. I've done this for so many years that you do kind of get a feel for which colors are harder to clean with that little bit of surface contamination that happens.
Thank you for that. Next question, Angela, do you have a favorite artist, favorite art book? Anything you would recommend to the audience today?
There are some really wonderful books out there. Jean Haynes is an artist who really was influential for me in teaching me to really value my inner artist, the artist I was meant to be, rather than trying to be someone else. And she also has a beautiful loose and fluid style. And I also try to be as diverse as possible when it comes to my influences, because I don't want to echo anybody. So I love looking at, I have extensive Pinterest boards of artists in a vast amount of disciplines and subject matter. And then, there's little things about each artist that inspire me. Use of color, use of shape, maybe an artist who's just way braver than I would be, or way weirder, I don't know. But I like inviting that diversity into my creative practice.
Thank you. Next question is, Angela, do you prefer wet on wet or start with dry in most of your paintings?
Most of my paintings, I generally start with dry paper. And then by the end of that first layer, the whole thing is wet. So it's kind of a wet on dry that transitions to wet and wet. Those early marks, then you get a little bit more control. But then you also invite that fluidity and movement in. So I like being able to make some interesting marks to kind of jumpstart my painting, and it's easier to do on dry paper.
Grabbing the next one. Quite a few came in at once. I'm sorry, folks. We're going to get to as many as we could, I promise. I'm just grabbing them as I see them. There's no particular order. Next question. I always have difficulty on the amount of water that my brush should hold. What should I do? I would like to see someone wet the brush, pick up color, go to the paper. Please help.
Yeah, this is one of those things that, I love. It's funny because so often when a student comes to me with a problem that they're having, the best cure is just time, brush miles, investing that time, because then you really get a feel for it and it starts to feel instinctive. It's like the muscle memory thing. But I'm going to show you just quickly here. reaching for my water container, trying not to drip it on the laptop. When I grab paint, when I clean my brush, I usually swirl it around here. And then I almost always just drip off that drip so that my brush is kind of puffy with moisture, but not dripping. And I would call that a juicy brush. The other options that you have, and this has to be an area where you have to judge based on how wet your paper is. If your paper is starting to dry, you want a juicy brush, but sometimes you want a neutral brush, a brush that's not good, that has the same amount of water on it as the paper. And sometimes you want a thirsty brush where you've blotted out all the liquid, and it's going to serve as a sponge. So it really depends on what your goal is for the painting in that moment and how wet your paper is at the time. If your brush is far wetter than the paper, you're going to flood the paper with moisture and create blooms and blossoms, which often ruins that smooth effect you were going for. So, learning how to judge how much to use very much depends on how wet your paper is and the effect you want to create. And that can be cured by time. And just spending time, being willing to make those mistakes so that you can get to know what's going to happen as you do it over and over again.
Thank you for that. Next question. How do I do a representational painting with these methods?
That's a really good question. And how much time do we have? It's interesting because often representational work, painting stuff, let's use a landscape for an example, feels really complicated because my landscape's got trees and buildings and people and water and sky in it, and we have to figure out how all those things fit together. Working with a wet and wet beginning can often be very helpful because it's almost like we're looking at our picture, at our landscape reference, through maybe taking the glasses off, blurred together, where we only see those largest masses and no distinct details. And then that gives us the opportunity to build detail up. I also think that many representational painters actually have a good command of controlled watercolor skills, being able to make marks, small marks, use very little water. Working with these playful methods gives you a little bit more openness to allowing some unpredictability into your painting, and that often makes your paintings come alive. So there's this back and forth that I do. I can tell you that almost never have, there's an aspect where if I'm painting a landscape, I like to think to myself, how loose and relaxed can I get away with here? How far can I step away from rigid detail? And I almost never have overstepped the mark. There's almost always a little bit more risk that I could have taken. And it's really fun to see that and challenge myself in that area. We actually do some representational painting in Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way as well. So we take some of these techniques and apply them to, actual stuff.
Thank you. I think this is a question all of us have felt at different times is, this person asks, they can't sit down and paint until they clean the house or at least make it tidy. If all the excuses that come up before being able to sit down, and especially like finding time to play. Do you have any advice or guidance? Because this is something that exists. We all have so many different things.
Yeah, and I think so. I think procrastination is a form of fear, and we don't want to fail. Often we come to painting with an idea that we don't value that piece of paper for that mental health that it brings us, that creative escape that is so good for our mental health, for our creative therapy. And so if we ruin a painting, we feel like it's a judgment on us, and that makes us avoid painting. And we don't prioritize our mental health. We don't say, okay, I can't go to bed until, most of the time, we don't say I can't eat and I can't go to bed until I've cleaned the house and made it tidy. We still make time to take care of our physical bodies, but we are not good at doing that with our mental health and with something that can bring so much to our mindset. And so for me, there was a time in my life when my children were small and nap time could have been cleaning time. And I absolutely refused to do it. I wanted to make nap time for me. And sometimes that meant I was just on Facebook while they napped. But other times, I was able to make time to paint. And that was the only time I was going to get. So I had to value it. And one thing I think we can just do is just continue to talk to ourselves about the value of this kind of creative self-care. And, sometimes it's just do it, leave that stuff undone. And I have a beautiful studio now, but there was a time when I had to paint at my kitchen table with the dinner dishes behind me. And it was, you do learn, you train yourself to put up with some of that stuff so that you can have this other thing that's better.
Angela, we are at time. I know we didn't get to all the questions. Folks, before we sign off, I did want to take a second to remind everyone, first off, let's thank Angela in the chat. This was an incredible session. It was relaxing, it was therapeutic, and it was informative,
the time went by so quickly. We just didn't have enough time, Aaron.
Yeah, I know. Well, you'll be back. Don't worry. You have an open invite. But folks, let's let Angela know we appreciate her in the chat. Angela, thank you so much for being here today. As we said earlier, Angela's course, Learn Watercolor the Heartlit Way, the link to her course is in the YouTube description. I'll put it again in the YouTube chat before I sign off, and we'll email it out after. Thank you, everyone. We genuinely appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And more than anything, Angela, we appreciate you making the time to teach this audience all of the wonderful things that you know.
Oh, thank you so much. It was my privilege.
Oh, thank you. And with that, we'll be signing off. Bye, everyone.
Bye.